Hey everyone, Jim Coventry from RotoWire here. Week 18 coming up. So we're gonna have the takeaways from week 17. Hopefully a bunch of you are still with us. I know the fantasy season for many is over. There's DFS, there's NFL playoffs. We'll have a lot of great content for you. I'll be breaking down those playoff games like nobody's business. I will give you some of the best information I could give you to get those games all figured out. Again, DFS with your gambling. My Super Bowl record is impeccable. When we get to that point, it can be 2 weeks to break down one game, and yeah, that gets pretty good for me on my end. But anyway, glad everybody's here. Happy week 18 playoff picture firming up in the NFL. Here are some takeaways that we're going to look at. But before we get into that, remember, follow me at Jim Coventry NFL on Twitter. That'd be a great thing to do if you're not doing so now. I always put up a lot of actionable advice. I give you a lot of detail and breakdown. I give you threads, do some videos, just a lot of actionable stuff for you to utilize. And of course, if you're on YouTube now, which I know I have people on Instagram here, I have people on YouTube and Twitter over here. If you're on YouTube, smash the like and subscribe button. And those who are on the platform where you can see the banner on the bottom, if you got 2 free days of RotoWire, just look down. No credit card needed. We could do that. All right, takeaway number 1, Mike Evans. And this is the problem, right? So we're setting our fantasy championship lineups. And if Mike Evans happened to be on your team, you realize he had 10 or fewer PPR points in 7 of his last 8 games. And the one game he went over is 13. So he was like a floor play. Now he was getting some floor. It wasn't like he was putting up zeros. So there's that. And, I think a lot of people may have just kept him in the lineup because, again, he wasn't getting zeros. He wasn't getting what you wanted, but he was getting something. But then there are people in smaller leagues, 8-team leagues, 10-team leagues, and you may have legitimately had a decision between Mike Evans and a very, very solid weekly starter who've been having a higher floor. And so I got it. When people asked about benching Mike Evans, I understood because there was no upside. And when we were watching Brady play, he was just missing him. So here's what happened. Yes, he scored 48.7 PPR points. Hopefully he wasn't on many of your benches. Hopefully you have him in line because he was a week winner. So the Buccaneers played the Panthers way back a while ago. And I had Mike Evans in as a definite DFS play that week and a prop bet play that week. And he dropped this touchdown pass. It was like that. It hit his hands, it hit his knee, it popped in the air. He tried to recover. He would have had the whole yardage for the day on that one catch. And then that went away. And it was almost like that was a microcosm of the rest of the season because he had been regularly putting up like close to 20 PPR points for like the first 6 weeks of the season. And then it was like that. And the Panthers secondary had injuries. So it was a real attackable matchup. And since we've seen Evans have great matchups and Brady just misses him, it's like literally throw the ball there. Evans is there, somewhat covered, but not really. And it just wasn't working. So the reason you would fade Evans and DFS and fade Brady is they didn't look good at all against some really bad defenses. So we had a similar situation with Carolina this time around. Dante Jackson's been out forever. He was injured, but they also were without J.C. Horn. So they were really stripped down at cornerback, and it's not a great unit there. So all the Bucs did, basically, the Panthers realized the struggles the Bucs had. So they were trying to compress the defense. They didn't think Brady would throw it deep. They didn't think maybe he could throw it deep. Possibly. Well, it was literally 3 go routes. Evans just going straight downfield. The defense was pinching in, and he ran right by him. And Brady just threw it up, and Mike Evans was Mike Evans. And now we have that going on. Now, in the NFL playoffs, now we've seen that. Teams who are playing them, okay, so they still can connect if it's open. I still am skeptical about a body of work that was almost 2 months long where Mike Evans had no upside. Ultimately, he's Mike Evans, Hall of Famer, right? But I just want you to understand it was not something we could have predicted. We could have said if they play 10 times based on the recent 6 weeks, twice Evans could maybe come up and do this. We might have been able to say that. But based on what we've seen, there was no rational way to predict that. And then Davante Adams was the next one. And in my advice to many, and I know a lot of you ask, and people were asking, do I bench Davante Adams? And I said, look, Jarrett Stidham might stink. He may have never played a full game. 25 snaps is his maximum amount of snaps in a game in like 4 years in the league. But I said, look, the ball's got to go somewhere. Davante Adams could get 10 targets, and he's Davante Adams. He's still Davante Adams. And we love the 49ers defense, but the one weakness they have is at corner. So I'm like, you could bench Adams, and you could bench him for a reasonable option. But understand, he's still Davante Adams. And this is an NFL quarterback throwing him the ball. Now, if it's Jared Stidham throwing the ball to Mac Hollins, that's another story. But you still have a superstar in the equation. So my typical advice to people was understand what you're doing. If you can live with Adams going off on your bench, then feel free. But I was saying Adams, I certainly did not predict Adams was getting 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Certainly didn't do that. But I certainly thought he could have gotten 80 or 90 yards with a decent chance to score. And he hadn't done that in 3 games. But the offense was a mess. So anyway, that said, it's what lesson do we learn from this, right? With both Evans and Adams, if you've got them, it's the fantasy playoffs. Don't get cute. If they've been down for 3 games, if they've been down for 6 games, as long as you're not putting up zeros, get them in the lineup, because not many players can have those games. Those are the games that win you your fantasy league. It's the 48 points from Mike Evans. That's what wins it. Got lucky last year. Played Dave Richard of CBS Sports in the Kings Classic, 14 team. He had Jamar Chase with 56 points, and I was able to overcome that, but that often doesn't happen. Usually when you get that player, that team wins. All right, let's talk a few more things. DJ Moore. So, look, we got to keep wrapping our mind around this. He had a goose egg in week 14, but and a goose egg is specific, right? I mean, it's like even one catch for 12 yards. It's something. But the dude's goose egged. But otherwise, he's been really good. I mean, with Sam Darnold, right? So in the fantasy playoffs, at least 73 yards and a touchdown all 3 weeks. So if somebody could get past that goose egg, and look, when I was giving people advice, that goose egg was there and it was recent. And there were some favorable matchups. But if you started him, you're going. So overall, I want to say it's like his last 5 games, 4 of them have been really, really good. Like high end receiver 2, if not borderline receiver 1, right? So Sam Darnold is probably at some point going to face tougher defense. Not this year, obviously, this year's over. And if he's there next year, he's going to turn into a pumpkin. But DJ Moore, we've been saying for years, is an elitely talented player who's just been in horrific situations. And we've always overdrafted him because we know what he can do. He can win at every area of the field. And when he gets the ball in his hands, he's like a running back. And that's a great skill for a wide receiver to have. I mean, I'm not comparing him to A.J. Brown. When I talk about a receiver with the ball in his hands like a running back, that's the standard. That's like Terrell Owens back in the day. And that's like, A.J. Brown. And to a lesser degree, DJ Moore, but it's the general concept we're talking about. Those players. So if we could ever get him before he gets too old in a situation where he has a quarterback that's going to get him the ball, that's what we need to have. But so next year when we're drafting DJ Moore, I think the majority of the season is going to suppress his ADP, but we have to see who his quarterback is. There's a lot of research to be done. And then James Conner is next. I was in heavy last year on Conner, won me a lot of leagues. This year, I was moderately in on him. The draft cost was a little bit richer, and he had a bad start to the season. He was not good. And the thing was, there was no run blocking last year. There was no run blocking this year, but it just didn't work. And then all of a sudden, he had a little injury, a couple weeks, and he came back. He's been a rock star since. He's got like 100 scrimmage yards at 4 of his last 5 games, playing 97% of the snaps. Now, he did get over to 100 scrimmage yards, but he got hurt yesterday, a shin injury. He played 55% of the snaps. So you got enough out of Conner. If you use him to be happy, if you use him in DFS in a tournament, it didn't work. The injury ended up being problematic. When you're playing 55% of the snaps, that is a problem, right? But he looks really good. And then same game, we talked about the prop. We gave another thing. If you're following me at Jim Coventry NFL, I always give you rationalized out prop bets, but you make the decision. I lay out all the groundwork. You decide I agree with this, I don't agree with this, and then you make your best decision. I'll never tell you who to bet, but I'll give you at least more of my research leads me to like 3 or 4 props a week. I'll point out exactly what the research showed. Well, Tyler Allgeier was the guy who was coming on. In the 2 weeks prior, he had out carried Patterson 35-21. 6 yards per carry to 3. It was really looking great. Now, interesting enough, it became closer to back to a timeshare yesterday against Arizona. That was surprising, but Allgeier at least got it done. If you bet the prop, he went over that. He had 20 carries, 83 yards. The prop was in the 77 range, so he made it by about 6 yards, so that was fine. Even if the line went up on you, you should have comfortably covered that, so that was good. And but he scored. And it was an easy defense, so we like that. But overall, so Patterson was looking like an older back. He had a big day yesterday. He played really well. They threw him the ball. They hadn't been doing that. He had a bunch of targets. I think he got 6 passes. So Patterson is the best we've seen of him in a couple months. But ultimately, I would imagine Allgeier is their lead back next year. I would imagine they're happy enough with what they've seen that they're not going to actively recruit somebody to take that job. Arthur Smith is going to run the ball, even if he has receivers and an upgraded quarterback, and because the play action game works so well for him. So right now, Allgeier is going to be an interesting case. We don't know what his ADP will be, but if he's going to have that lead job based on what we've seen, he's a very hard runner. He breaks some tackles. He has a little bit of elusiveness. He can catch the ball too. He's good after the catch. I see right now, if he's a starter, he's in that top 20 running back mix. And again, there's a lot I got to break down in the offseason. It's just so concentrated in the regular season. But Allgeier is a player we're going to take a strong look at. Now, if they bring in somebody I don't think they will, then we got to consider that. But definitely Allgeier is a player on the up, and those who have him in dynasty leagues are there, looking to be in a good spot right now. DeAndre Swift, wow! And here's what happened: we were on the live stream start sit yesterday, and we started at like 11 Eastern, 11:30. The inactives come out, so I'm giving questions and answers, and then finally the inactives drop, and Justin Jackson's inactive, and somebody had just asked a DeAndre Swift question, and I said, if you're still here, back up. I said, now with Justin Jackson, it ended up being a mistake, but I'll point this out. Justin Jackson was eating 25% of the snaps. And all right, well, now it looks like Swift is going to get enough carries. He was getting like 8 to 9 touches. And we're like, well, now we'll get a little more work out of him. And so now I told people, if you're on the fence with Swift, this should put you over and you start him. Well, ultimately, they gave Craig Reynolds the 20% of the snaps. Don't get it. And so that was really problematic. But Swift got some touches, and he got 15 touches. That was it. Playing the Bears, super easy matchup. Instead of the 8 or 9 touches, it was 15. Gets a couple of touchdowns, breaks a couple long plays. So he totally gets it done, over 100 scrimmage yards in that game. So here's the deal with DeAndre Swift. Look, Dan Campbell's going to be back. There's a borderline playoff team. If they beat the Packers and if the Seahawks lose, then they're in playoffs. Well, regardless, they were in the brink of the playoffs. And so Dan Campbell's back. Whatever it is with DeAndre Swift, he doesn't use them. I don't know if he's concerned with the long-term injury history. This may be his way of keeping him healthy. He may not like something about the way he plays. Coaches are finicky. Sometimes it's like, you don't pass protect the way I like, or it may be, you don't run the play as designed. And it could be things like this that we don't necessarily see as analysts. But if Dan Campbell's the coach, if DeAndre Swift is getting drafted in the 2nd round, right now, there is no way I'm touching it. In the 4th round, because I can't trust Dan Campbell. It's nothing about Swift. Swift's a superstar. Swift was on 23 other teams. He'd be a top 5 fantasy pick. No question asked. He might be a top 3 pick. Now, the health's an issue, right? He's been hurt a lot, so we might ding him a bit for that. But my point is, he's a clear first-round type player. Running, receiving ability, explosive plays, good in the red zone. But Dan Campbell, it's got to be a really fair ADP for me to consider him next year. And then Cam Akers, I was in on him in the preseason. I was getting him in the 3rd and 4th rounds earlier in drafts. He ended up being 3rd later. I was going receiver heavy early in some leagues. And Cam Akers, look, In 2020, Sean McVay featured him, used him as a runner, receiver, 3-down back. And last year, they hustled him back from this Achilles injury, and they got him on the field. And they eventually had to pull back because he just didn't have an explosiveness. So he comes in this year, and oh my gosh, it was like there was 9 weeks, all right, 6 weeks. Then he got kicked off the team for 3 weeks or whatever. And he averages 2.5 yards a carry, right? Well, then Cam Akers comes back from that being kicked off or whatever he was. And then it's a 3-week span. He goes about 3.5 yards a carry. So it was very solid, decent. And then the last 3 weeks, he's over 5 yards a carry, over 100 scrimmage yards in the last 3, over 100 rushing yards in the last 2. And here's the difference. We could see this on tape. It was early in the season. He was unable to quickly get to the line, to get to the hole, to make the move and make the defender miss. Now he's getting there quickly enough to make things happen. When there's a hole, he hits it with authority, speed, and power. So he looks like pre-injury Cam Akers. He did not look like that. It's been 3 separate seasons for him this year. Again, 1-9, and then it was like weeks 11 to 13 or 14, and now it's like 15 to 17. It's been 3, and they've been very consistent. So it's been a ramped up improvement. And so to me, that's a clear indicator because the Rams line hasn't gotten any better. It definitely hasn't that. So next year, how am I looking at Cam Akers? Again, there's a lot to parse in the offseason, but right now, 15 to 18 running backs are off the board. I know Sean McVay likes him. Sean McVay wanted to center the offense around him in 2020. He wanted to do that in the preseason this year, but Akers just couldn't run. But he can now. So right now, 15, 18 running backs off the board. Because I'm burned a little bit, and you got to factor that in. You know, we can't go all narrative. Can't pretend like a lot of the season didn't happen. But yeah, at that point, I'm willing to take the shot and go after Cam Akers again. Kirk Cousins, oh man. So if you had him in fantasy leagues, look, he was playing great. He was playing great like the last 5 weeks. He had a number of like 400-yard games, multi-touchdowns, and the narrative's always hanging out there. And people ask me start sits like he's been hot, and the Packers play that soft zone, and they just give up all kinds of Christmas candy, Halloween candy to the quarterbacks. And man, Cousins, it's 3 games this year. It was the Dallas game, 100 yards, no touchdowns. He shouldn't have had a touchdown here. They should have pulled his ass out of the game. This game was over in the fourth quarter. They were down 30 points. Why you'd leave him in the game at that point is just dumb. He gets a lucky touchdown. Now, didn't really salvage his fantasy. They get him to 200 yards. He had, 3 picks, a fumble lost. But he looked like that prime time, big game Kirk Cousins. There was a third game. I can't remember the Jets. The Jets just mauled him. He had nothing done. And, of course, poor investors in Justin Jefferson, they had to deal with Cousins. And hopefully they were able to overcome that, but not so good. So, look, right now, Kirk Cousins was great in most of his games. But we know this exists, these implosion games. They're regular, somewhat regular. There's a few a year. I will not put him inside my top 12 quarterbacks in a 12-team league. I will put him outside the top 12 because I don't want to count on him for being my starter. I want him to be there if I need him. If there's an injury, if there's a bye week, if he's putting up 40 on my bench, maybe I play the narrative. Maybe if it's not a primetime game, maybe if it's not against a very good team, we consider. But otherwise, he's a backup for me because you can't have these implosion games when you need them most. And it's been a career of this. So, I hate to get into that narrative because I'm an analyst, but man, every time I just get more and more convinced. Last one, Mike White, career backup. That's what Mike White is. He came in last year. He came in the middle of a game due to an injury, did okay. Then he had that game on the Thursday night, and he went off. And in the last 3 games, production went down. As a matter of fact, it was like, hardly any touchdowns and good number of interceptions. The yardage was way down. This year, same thing. Came out against the Bears. It's the Bears, right? Comes out, does really well against the Bears. But now in his last 3 games, no touchdown passes, 4 picks. He's a young quarterback. The book isn't written on him, but realistically, they weren't emphatic about putting him in. I know they drafted Zach Wilson, but if Mike White was the answer all along, they probably would have said, Mike White, you're our guy. this is what happens when you have a career backup. They can have good games. They can carry you, they can carry you for short periods of time. But ultimately, when the more and more film comes out on them, when the adjustments are made, I mean, Garrett Wilson had 11 targets. What was it, like 3 for 18? Ugh. And Seattle's not a world record defense either, right? I know their fantasy numbers against receivers are good, but this has been a team you can move the ball on. And the Jets weren't able to do that. And Zonovan Knight, and I wasn't going to really talk about him, but I told people this week I was very concerned. They asked me to start him. No, I think he was a flash in the pan. I think he had his couple good weeks. Again, the Bears, there was a game after that. And then we just kind of saw, and then one was the bad weather game, so we gave him a little pass, but it was like 2.5 yards a carry in his 3 previous games. And then there was yesterday, they played Ty Johnson over him early and often. So, yes, so that is exactly what happened there. So they have Ty Johnson ahead of him. I don't know how Ty Johnson keeps doing it, but the coaching staff must love him. All right, now let's see what we've got going on here. First of all, thank you for being here. If you're on YouTube, please hit the like and subscribe. I'd appreciate that greatly. Outside of that, if you're not following me on Twitter at Jim Coventry NFL, please do. It means a lot to me if you do, and I can share my weekly information with you. All right, we got some questions here. Jazz, what do you got? Speaking of the Bears and guys who look like them, is Sanborn start. So hard to say. He's the middle linebacker position is an IDP thing, right? You pile up the tackles because you're the middle linebacker. Funneled runs inside, you are going to get tackles. And we see it, right? And so this the IDP, that's why I don't like IDP. IDP, my analysis does me no good. When your number one IDP player every year, like back in the day, it wasn't J.J. Watt, or if it's not Aaron Donald, there's something wrong with your system. But the whole key to IDP is you're getting 10 to 12 tackles a game. And those are your linebackers. They're compilers. And that's why I don't like IDP. I can identify which guys are in those positions, sure. But to me, that takes no skill. And if you play IDP, God bless you. I'm glad you love it. Keep loving it. But for me, I'm an analyst. And to me, I got to know the why behind everything. And, and for me, it's just, I can't do that. But anyway, so Sanborn, yeah, I imagine they're going to bring somebody in. He's a replacement level player. And that's probably about the end of it. But I mean, he'll compile the tackles if they need them. And in the NFL, Jaws, right now, middle linebackers, they're not highly regarded. They're not drafted high. You draft your outside edge rushers, you draft your corners, anybody else with the rushing profile. But the inside linebackers, they're just considered replaceable. Necessary evil, you got to have him on the field. And if you have an elite one, great. But you notice team, like I was worried when Dallas, not following the college defense so great. When Dallas drafted Micah Parsons, I'm like, they drafted a linebacker? I had no idea. He'd be the ultimate chess piece. They knew that. And that's why they drafted him there. But there are teams that draft these inside linebackers high, and it's like, what are you doing? That's not today's game. It's about the pass, the edge, the speed. The inside linebacker, great. Oh, we can stop the interior run game. Great. Who does it? The good teams don't even bother running, right? Chiefs don't bother running. The Bills don't bother running. Bengals run when it suits them. But think about it, right? Not too many teams. The 49ers are, different, and they're able to do it. But that's it. I don't see any more questions. Appreciate everybody. Thank you for your time. It's the most valuable thing you have. You chose to hang out with me. It means a lot. Everybody, have a great day, and we will talk soon.